I'm Bryce Butler from Access Ventures, and this is More Than Profit, a show where I talk with founders, investors, entrepreneurs, and leaders of all kinds about living and working with purpose, how they do it, and why. My guest this week is a woman whose entire life has been one of service. From the Foreign Service at an early age to now her role as the Senior Vice President at the Mission Investors Exchange, Melanie Audette shares with us the vital role of catalytic capital, but also the need for continued education as we work to build the field of impact investing. On both ends of the spectrum, people are either skeptical about impact washing and the money that is flooding into the space, or skeptical that all this will amount to is more do-gooder capital that is concessionary at best. Melanie sees great promise in the evolution of this space and is more excited than ever for what lies ahead. But as she says, as long as we show up and build trust. A lesson that she learned from an early age through the help of many mentors that helped shape her outlook on the world.
I actually had to wait until my 21st birthday to, complete the process of being able to enter government service. And so I started my career as a baby in a sense, but that gave me an advantage because I was able to be in the presence of a lot of great thinkers and really great networkers, foreign service cocktail parties at a very young age. And so I think that started to drive me down this journey that has given me a really broad perspective on my work in really my work of service, because that's how I feel about what I do. I think of myself as living a life of service.
Well, and so how did you get drawn to that? So 21 to make that decision and to pursue that. How did you say I'm going to go do the foreign service? Like what was the driver in that, and how did you get there even to begin with?
Well, it's a story probably longer than we have for this interview, but I'll just say that I was at a point in my young life where I sat down on the sofa with a notebook and said, what are the goals for me in this life? I already had 2 children at that point in time and was really struggling to think about how I, as an individual, who was quite ambitious, but who had started with some, I'll just say, more opportunities than the rest of us. And that includes some barriers that I had faced early in my life. How do I take being this young person and really make a difference and fulfill those goals that I explicitly wrote out when I was like 20 years old? And through my work at a large law firm in Philadelphia, I had some incredible mentors who helped me to access the individuals and the information that I needed in order to find my way to work in Washington, first in the Office of Caribbean Affairs, and worked on Haiti, and then was able to go overseas after a couple of years in DC.
Wow. What an interesting time to also work in Haiti. I think a lot going on in the world in the Caribbean at that point in human history too. So, but what a powerful story, because I think what I love is the thread that I've heard from a lot of the guests that we've had around someone in their life that mentored them and that helped them think through these things. That the fact that you actually thought to sit down and to write out these goals, like what do I want to do, what do I want to be, despite maybe what the circumstances were before. What do I want my life to be like, and what do I want to live towards? It's pretty powerful, especially at 20 years old. I mean, what an impressive thing to think about, and hopefully an encouragement to people. Like, 20 years old, it's never too late. 25 years old, it's never too late. 30-year-old, 50 years old, it's never too late to kind of take stock of what it is you want to do and be in the world, and try to pursue that. So really, really neat. So
I'm a big believer, Bryce, in passing it on.
Yeah.
And so I take that work very seriously around mentoring others, because I think it's really important for all of us to pass along that kind of guidance.
Yeah. And is that something that helped steer you towards philanthropy? Because in the moments that I've known you over the last half a dozen years, from Indiana Grant Makers to now your work at Mission Investors Exchange, that's generally been an ethos that I've experienced in the few moments that we've had where you want to really help people think through XYZ. And so you're really trying to help them maximize what it is they want to do or be in the world. Is that a thread that helped kind of move you from even the foreign service into your work in philanthropy at all?
It is. My work in Indiana included helping young people to understand philanthropy initially, through our work with the Youth Philanthropy Initiative of Indiana, and also after school clubs for kids, like second through fourth graders, never too young to learn. And then also my work in Seattle with some nonprofits, working with individuals who had similar challenges, worse challenges, I would say, than what I had experienced. So yes, and it's about believing in yourself, but also looking at not only problem solving, but finding opportunities where they might not really look like they're available initially. And that does translate into impact investing and being able to identify the people that you want to work with, those who you can build trust with. This is especially important in the current environment where even, ESG is such a hot topic. You have to take the time to make relationships and build trust. It's essentially important. And that includes intermediaries, the service providers that you use. And even with the focus, rightly so, on racial equity and trying to find diverse managers and supply chains that provide opportunities for others. It's you can't leapfrog the steps of creating real authentic relationships, because it takes that to build trust.
I think that's great, which I think is a good segue into kind of the work you're doing today. I'm familiar with Mission Investors Exchange as a member and have been for a while, but I think I've been around since it emerged, like the PRI network and Mission Related Investors Network. So if you could take a moment, just given where you are in your role as the Senior Vice President at the Mission Investors Exchange, help our listeners understand what is the Mission Investors Exchange. And then I think a good follow-up to that is what is it? And then why is it an important organization, especially right now, as we look at the landscape of finance, community development, philanthropy? Why is it essential and important that Mission Investors Exchange
The organization is a nonprofit. It's a network of mission-oriented investors. It grew out of a meeting of individuals that represented foundations of different sizes and types that had a common goal of deploying program-related investments in communities, and that brought them past just being grant makers as institutions. Over the years, the tools that have been identified and created to deploy capital from different sources within the foundation, for instance, and along different themes with different rates of risk and return and impact. Our organization has evolved into still serving primarily foundations, but other family offices, sometimes some individuals have been involved, in corporations are members as well. We have been evolving along with the field. The services that are provided are not just transactional services, like you have access to this webinar or you have a reduced fee at this conference, but they're really relational services as well, because a key part of being a network is to do what I just described, i.e., it's an opportunity to connect with others that have common goals with you and build those relationships that are so essential in both finding other resources and providers, and even investments, and helping each other to think and be supportive of the field of creating, for instance, impact measures or intermediary organizations or funds. And so it's really a community within a community, not only the community being philanthropy, but also the community that's impact finance as well. And increasingly, there's just more and more of a diversity of our members. The roles, for instance, that our members play have moved to maybe just social investment team members, if there is such a thing at foundations, or CEOs of small foundations. But it's, increasingly more finance and investment staff, more program officers have come into these conversations, which
Yeah.
is a good and healthy thing for our field.
Oh, for sure. And I think there's a vital need for an organization like Mission Investors Exchange. First and foremost, I think one of the conversations that I have with a lot of people is there's an innate desire, at least that I found, for people to align who they are with where their money's going. I think there is fundamentally people want that, but I think oftentimes maybe they don't know how. Well, they may not think it's possible because they believe, okay, I've got to go maximize profit. So therefore, if I'm doing that, it's going to have negative externalities that I just have to turn a blind eye to. So if they don't believe that and they actually think, okay, it's possible to align our values with our investments or our programs or whatever, they don't know what the next step is. And I think it's just human nature. It's like, okay, I'm excited, but what do I do now? And then they turn around, and a lot of times the people speaking are the ones that are, around the corner on the marathon, and they it's hard to translate sometimes back to that person taking that first turn. And I think that's what I've always appreciated about organizations like Mission Investors Exchange. It's really meeting those funders, those foundations, those people, those organizations where they are, and resourcing them and helping them take that next step. Helping them understand that they don't have to avoid that iceberg in the first turn, but they can incrementally start turning the ship. So that's what I love about it. And so I think one of the things I would love is even just to back up, because I think when folks like you and I get to talking, we can assume that everybody understands what we're talking about. So I found on the podcast, sometimes it's helpful to define terms. One of the terms you used, I actually do feel sometimes people don't understand, which is a program-related investment. And I think especially you and I have talked about this before, Louisville, Kentucky, formerly in Indiana. I think in mid-America, there still is a lack of understanding around what that is and how that can be used. Can you talk to us a little bit? What is a program-related investment?
The best way to describe it is that the best way to learn about it is literally to go to the IRS's website. And you can't do that for a lot of the other tools that we talk about as far as, what is an impact investment? Even, what is ESG? What does that mean? And that's because it's one of the very few tools that foundations and specifically private foundations can use that's codified by the IRS. And there's a very clear definition for what a PRI is. In practice, a PRI is a tool that is I'll just say grant-like, because you can apply funds deployed in PRIs against the charitable distribution that a private foundation has to make each year. But the tool in practice can be in the form of debt or equity or even guarantees. There are really clear examples of how these can be deployed. But the key is that they have to be documented as being in alignment with your foundation's charitable mission. They can't be used for lobbying purposes. There are those usual kind of check marks that the IRS likes to see from private foundations. Um, the history is that they were used initially primarily in affordable housing and access to capital to overcome redlining. Um, and, the Ford Foundation was really key to, beginning this opportunity for private foundations. Over time, those, what you can do with a PRI has been expanded technically to being able to get dollars out that are mission oriented,
Mm-hmm.
and that's essentially important for private foundations to remain
Yeah.
within the codification.
And I love that you sent people to the IRS website, because I would agree. I think very few times can you do that.
Their
But
attorneys and accountants appreciate it too.
yeah, that's right. That's right. But I think you're right. I mean, there is a very clear definition on the IRS website as to what a program related investment is. Now, the nuance, the difficulty, the technical complexity is in how that's applied. And I think that's what I've appreciated about like the Mission Investors Exchange, or like you said, relationship building, because ultimately I think that's what the purpose of MIE is to bring people together who care about this. Now, they may not have the same mission, but the practices or the principles that I've learned or I'm using might be helpful in something that you're working on. So you're on the board of the Energy Foundation. I have to believe the financial models or principles, if you will, of somebody even working on affordable housing could be applied in some fashion, if those best practices are learned and shared across to groups like the Energy Foundation. And that's what I think is super, super important, because in mid-America, Louisville, Kentucky, Indiana, you name it, there's a fear of the unknown. And I think, and in the big, fiduciary responsibility that many boards and investment committees feel, or senior staff, the responsibility and the liability, if you will, that they face, oftentimes they're reticent to try these new things. And I think even though it's very clear on the IRS website what it is, the technical application, the devil's in the details, so to speak, is where it gets really tricky. And that's where I think it's good to kind of learn from folks that have gone before, and to kind of see how they did that and what they learned, what private letter rulings are already out there that have been tested and supported with the IRS, which is really technical, but I think super, super important as we continue to build the field.
Yeah, on that, foundations have a unique place in that they can do more than a lot of other investors. And the codification of PRIs really gives them that flexibility. The idea here is that to count as a PRI, this has to be an quote investment that no other regular investor would make. If the purpose is not primarily to make money for the foundation, the purpose is a mission purpose. And so that gives foundations the space, which they've always had with their grants, to be real innovators. We used to tell these stories in philanthropy before there was a lot of visibility to PRIs or any of the other impact investing tools, around how foundations have this opportunity to fund something before anybody else knows that it's important. And we used to use the example of the white lines on the sides of the roads. Apparently a foundation first funded, like putting white lines on the sides of the road. Kind of,
wow.
There are a lot of examples around that, where, and even with some of the work around, social impact bonds, people say, oh, well, do these work or don't they? The idea is that you're kind of getting in there into a space where if you can open the door, others can follow on, because you're able to prove a point with a lot of this work, that this is really important. Nobody else can get into that space because their motivation is, for instance, a financial return initially. they're more restricted by that, whereas foundations could and should really be able to do this kind of work in order to unleash other capital. And sometimes it takes some time, to be able to prove an innovation point, and foundations do have that flexibility.
Which I think is great. I think Gates once said like that philanthropic capital should be some of the riskiest capital. It should be testing new ideas. Something might prove itself scalable, and but at the genesis of it, it's like, I don't know, this may or may not work. And so that's where I think philanthropic capital can get really creative. And I have to. So you said something about the evolution of MIE, and I have to believe part of that was, historically it was the program related investors network and the mission investors related investors network, in the kind of the merging of the two. So we've talked about PRIs. On the other side, you mentioned like that a lot of individuals and even corporate groups are getting involved. And I have to believe that's probably because the field is being developed even further around mission related investing, where there's a lot more depth, whether that's, definition around metrics and defining and measuring impact, ESG, and just the emergence of people interested in aligning value investing. Help us. So what is mission related investing, and how does that differ from program related investing?
Yeah, so the PRI Makers Network merged in 2012 with the More for Mission campaign. Yes, and that was a campaign to encourage endowments to devote, I think it was 2%, don't quote me, might have been 3%, but it was a very small percentage of their endowment funds towards mission. And that did start us off on the pathway. The field evolution into, well, just to answer your question around MRIs, they are not codified, and they have been called different things. And over time, they've been wrapped up under this umbrella that includes PRIs, that's called impact investing. So there is a lot of vagueness and murkiness about what an MRI is. I think for the sake of this interview and for people to be able to understand what you can do, it's the perception is that this is money oftentimes that's carved out of an endowment to be able to be measured separately or differently. There's a fantastic program that we just did with the Ford Foundation about how they created, they carved out of their endowment. Harvard Business School did this 2-part case study that I highly recommend folks listen to on how that actually can happen. That, you take an endowment, you carve out a piece of it. Sometimes that carve out includes space just for PRIs, sometimes for more mission related, endowment related opportunity that includes something of great purpose. For instance, we want to take this part of the endowment and have a very robust effort around diversifying managers. Every foundation has different sources of capital for their impact investing programs. And it's just a matter of, there are lots of sources of capital in a foundation or in a corporation, because you mentioned this too for corporations. What do we want to create as the program? What of all of these sources of capital do we want to be able to devote towards various levels of risk and impact return and financial return and learning return, really? So those are decisions that boards and fiduciaries have to make, and there are an incredible number of models, and I would say probably very few strategies are consistent across foundations. And that includes how they staff, how they do the work. It's all over the board. There's no one model that fits every foundation. Though the more people coming on board and the newer folks, they really have an advantage because they can lean back on some of the work of Ford Foundation and MacArthur and Packard and, a lot of Kresge, a lot of the big ones have been doing this for a very long time, as well as Gond and a lot of the small Vader philanthropies. They've been in it from the beginning too. the newcomers have an advantage because they can see, um, they can integrate across their foundation, for instance, from the start, instead of having, just this very small social investment teams. And now those foundations are doing more to integrate across their organizations. Newcomers really have an advantage because you can build with the education, you can build it into your foundation from the start of your program.
Yeah. And that's great because I think one of the things Liesl and I were from Blue Haven last week were talking about was that idea of building this in, integrating it from the beginning. But the starting point being like asking yourself very fundamental questions, which is what I'm hearing you even talk like, what are you trying to do in the world? Like what is it that you care about? But also what is, and this is I think an important thing for people to remember, what do you need the capital to do? And I think sometimes I've talked with folks and they're almost embarrassed to ask that question, but I think it still is an important question. Like, what does your board expect? What do you expect? What does the community expect? And so I think, what are you trying to do in the world? What does the capital need to do in the world? So from a risk and return perspective, I loved the notion you said around learning. Like, what can we learn? What can we learn? What can we share? Because I think that's another part of this as well. And then from that, you develop a strategy, right? And then I think fundamentally what I love in these conversations is at the end of the day, what we're talking about is money as a tool. It's a resource to help us accomplish something. And that something is defined not by money, although money is a part of it. It's defined by kind of all these different things, stakeholders and vision and mission and boards. And so I think that's really, really, really helpful because I think sometimes it's really easy to kind of separate out. This is what the money does. Go to Wall Street, get us good return, and then on a Google Sheet or in QuickBooks shoot out, okay, here's our operating budget for the year, and there's really no discussion between the two, which I've got to believe is super fun for you to be in the room with people and have them see this and understand this and start to experience that. So you've been with MIE for a while. Sorry, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that because another really key question for people to think about is, what can I do that others can't? And then the follow on is really, it's relational. So what am I doing in the context of what others are doing? And this is where some of our place-based impact investing ecosystem building work comes in, because an individual investor has a lot of flexibility, say that a large foundation or institutional investor doesn't necessarily have. So those two questions around, your work, but your work not in a silo. And then, your work in respect to what type of capital you have. And that capital is inclusive of relationship capital, because relationship capital, especially with our efforts around really, looking to build on the wisdom within communities and in end user markets that's being shown to us so clearly by 60 decibels these days. That relationship capital for anyone seeking investment is really important. But on the flip side, for people who want to deploy capital, you can't be on the ground every day in the communities that you're trying to invest in. So those relationships, and for some of our members, really shifting, power to communities, that relationship capital can't be underestimated, the importance of that capital.
No, those are really good points. That's great. So as we think about the work that you do at MIE and working with individuals and corporations and families and foundations and communities and stakeholders, on the non-program, on the mission, like on the endowment side, I feel like there's been a lot of work over the last 10 or so years to really try to begin to bring in some of the mainstream capital, into this world. ESG's really picked up. It's really hot and popular. There's a lot of financial practices. What are you seeing? Whether it's endowments or individuals or corporate, what are you seeing really excites you about this alignment of capital that's on this end of the spectrum, really targeting return and trying to give people a picture of you don't have to divorce the two, impact and financial returns. They can actually be possible together. What really excites you, and what are you seeing out in the world in that space?
One of the things that excites me more with more impact measures. So I'll just put that out there, because there have been, multiple global efforts around identifying impact and what that really means. Assuming we feel satisfied with the resources that we have on impact measures, I would say that being able to scale the visibility to really impactful companies, funds, is what excites me. And in many cases, that means developing more intermediaries and visibility to those intermediary entities, and really being able also to democratize this a little bit more, so that there's more access to platforms that allow investors to invest. On the ESG side, what excites me this week is, being able to access through Morningstar, on the, funds, because they bought Sustainalytics. So, there's a lot more visibility to impact in the regular Morningstar platform for advisors who may not have been focused on ESG before. It's a lot more accessible to them, and we know that their clients are asking for it. But being able to have this more normalized for the advisors that oftentimes create the barriers for individuals and even foundations to do this work, I think that is going to help a lot. There have been efforts over the years by advisors to get into this space, and many are motivated by the impact side, but then there are others who are motivated by getting additional client side. And so at MIE, we always like to say we play a key role in keeping the impact in impact investing. And for us, and for our foundation members in particular, that's really important. Really know what you're investing in, who you're investing with. And then what excites me as a side project, actually, that started out as a campaign to encourage and support high net worth women to become impact investors, because of the good work of Ellen Remmer at the TPI, the Philanthropic Initiative in Boston. She's been able to build out this platform called Invest for Better, with curriculum for high net worth women and impact investing circles around the country. Because, eventually you have to kind of put your feet where your mouth is. I started with two other women here in Seattle and Invest for Better circle. I hadn't really worked with individuals before, because we're usually working with foundations. And to see the progress from meeting to meeting, these meetings are every month. We have a different topic each month. And the action and activity that takes place in between these meetings as women learn. They're switching out where their cash is spending the night. They're talking with their advisors, sometimes with some of the same responses that really necessitate the education for investment advisors. And they're actively looking for investments and want to deploy their capital. Just seeing the rate of change as these individuals with significant resources learn. That's really exciting. And this isn't just happening here. Three started here in Seattle for the first time when I started mine with my partners here, Susan Fairchild and Bo Lee, but they're happening all over the country and even internationally as well. So
That's
that
fantastic.
is very exciting to me.
Yeah, and you hit on something with the education piece, because it's the power dynamics around money are still really um, disgraceful is one word I can think of. Just because I think, when you think about education and the people that actually are supposedly the ones that know everything about money, like the wealth advisors, the lawyers, the accountants. And so for high net worth individuals or investment committees or boards, oftentimes these are the people that are influencing very critical decisions. And so even all the things we talked about, the history of the Ford Foundation, the shoulders of giants that so many foundations now today could stand on, there still is a lot to be done, because there's a lack of awareness around this space still with many of those advisors, a lack of understanding, a lack of willingness. And so I think the work that I think MIE does and you with this initiative are doing is to help educate people to take control for themselves, the vision and the purpose of their money in a really powerful way. And I have to believe it's super fulfilling to see those light bulbs go on and those women become activated to go do some great things in their community.
Yeah, it is. And, things are changing too. And so what today is not necessarily what's going to be available tomorrow. You've probably seen in some of your conversations on this platform that when you get excited about investment, you want others to come along. And so we're seeing our members create investment opportunities for other investors. This term catalytic capital was really, birth is really with MacArthur, Omidyar School, and other leaders in this space. There is a real place, not just for foundations to educate each other, like in the peer learning that we do at Mission Investors Exchange, but also to prompt new funds to be created, and new blended capital structures and capital stacks in general that bring in lots of different types of capital, including capital from government, for example, alongside corporations, CRA dollars.
I mean, I think everything over the last
yeah,
over the last 4 years, and just now with the new administration and just the focus, recognizing, okay, government has a role. What is that role, and how do we better align? Because there was a conversation around where's CRA going, and opportunity zones, the confusion with the rollout there, and just this ability to kind of stack and align capital, and just so there's a lot of really cool tools, and there's now a revenue-based financing or profit sharing or co-ops like they're working on at Zebras Unite, and really, really cool stuff. And I think keeping up with that. So the evolution word that you used is a really appropriate one to kind of help make sure people are aware of, excited about, participating in these really cool things. So you and I could talk all day. I wanted to ask you two kind of questions in parting, because I think there's a conference I went to last year before COVID, of course, but where there's all this excitement about this space going mainstream. There's more capital moving in this direction, which I think is awesome, because it's been the goal, and I think that should still remain the goal, that we're aligning our impact with our money. But I do think there's always going to be concern. And so I'd love to know from your perspective, from your seat, what gives you pause as we kind of look to 2021, 2022? What gives you pause? And then what gives you hope? What gives you pause about impact investing and where it's going? And then what gives you hope for the future?
That's what gives me pause is those that don't have an expansive enough view of what impact investing can be. And I think that relates more to this, an impact investor is in relation with every other type of investor. I know that there is a concern generally about, quote, impact washing, but I think that if we're concerned about impact washing, then we have an obligation and responsibility to press back on those who are the impact washers and get the most out of them for impact. So I would say don't give up, or don't say, well, that's just, there's not enough impact there. Let's try and be more influential in order to not give in to a lack of infrastructure, a lack of impact measurement, and a lack of really public will, because we're seeing this from the public. We're seeing a desire to invest for the things that people want to see in the world, and especially with young people. We don't have time to go into what happened with Robinhood and last week, but we should be thinking about the will that individuals have and the power they have, and take advantage of that. When those people can speak back to power, as we've seen they have been able to do, they can have an incredible influence, and we should help to support driving that in the ways that really serve communities, and have community leaders speak up as to what that means to them. Yeah. So that's really a bit of hope too in the same sentence, Bryce.
No, I think I love it, because I think they're integrated. What gives you pause is also something that you're passionate to help solve for, and I think that's great. Because I think when I was listening to you talk about what kind of gives you pause around impact washing, it's a recurring theme around, hey, we haven't arrived. I love the notion of evolution of MIE, evolution of thinking, but even like for Access Ventures, I would say we do our best and we're as aligned as we can be right now, but that doesn't mean tomorrow we couldn't be more aligned or more intentional or more measured or more. And so how are we always getting better and pressing towards that? I think that's the goal, is like, let's figure this out. Let's roll up our sleeves. Let's dive in with our team and our community and get better at this. So.
And bring up others.
Exactly.
We need to be mentoring me more so than you, Bryce, but need to be mentoring next generation for sure.
No, that's a great word to go out on. The Mission Investors Exchange has some exciting work on the horizon, and just recently posted a public policy workshop that you can check out at missioninvestors.org. Thanks again for listening to More Than Profit, and if you've liked what you've heard, then do us a favor by subscribing and leaving us a review wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Bryce Butler with Access Ventures. Check out our work at accessventures.org. Thanks for listening.